Welcome, everybody, to the last episode of the Love is Louder webinar series. I can't believe that we've spent a month doing this journey together, and I'm so excited to be able to close this out with our special guest today. And I want to thank you for doing the journey and the due diligence of letting me know if you weren't going to be at the webinar, if you were going to watch afterwards, emailing me questions, sharing in the chat. It's been such a robust and rich time that we've shared together. And I'm just so excited that I haven't even told you who I am yet. That's how happy I am about what we've done together. I am your host. Welcome to Nurture the Soul. I am Rachel Ward, they, them. I'm the team leader and minister for Gender and Sexuality Justice Ministries. And this is a part of the national setting of the United Church of Christ, and it is held in the justice and local church ministry sector. So Nurture the Soul is a weekly webinar sharing practical, educational, innovative, and formational resources and engaging critical topics for local churches and people of faith. And together, we can bring our church, our communities, and all of us collectively towards a world that God imagines for all of us. So keep joining us every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Nurture the Soul. And, dear community, this work is made possible by us, the collective. So if you feel moved and you feel nourished, we ask that you consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Thank you. We are so grateful that you're here. And for the last time on our webinar series, before I introduce our guest, I want to elevate an action that you can take. So if you have questions, if you have curiosities, if you have wonderments, if you want to learn more about how you can involve yourself at the intersection of gender and sexuality justice, I am going to implore you extra to take the leap and sign up and register for what Reverend Noah is about to tell you about. Reverend Noah.
Thank you, Rachel. My name is Noah Brewer-Wallin, he and they pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Southern New England Conference. And I want to invite you to join us for our Justice Summit on trans and non-binary belonging in the church, which will take place on October 7th and has a fully online option. We will start and end our day together in worship, where we will be led by a team of trans, non-binary, and queer people, and hear from keynote preachers Reverend Nicole Garcia, the Faith Work Director at the National LGBTQ Task Force, and Reverend Tyler Connolly, the Conference Minister for the Central Pacific Conference. In the morning, you'll have the option of hearing from a panel of trans and non-binary people sharing their experiences and identities. If you are relatively new to conversations about and with trans and non-binary people, this session is for you. Your other morning option is joining Reverend Dr. Katrina Roseborough-Marsh, the Executive Director of the Open and Affirming Coalition, for a conversation about the theologies that ground open and affirming covenants, what it means to be ONA today, and a vision for an intersectional ONA movement. In the afternoon, you again have two workshop options, one about practical steps congregations can take to become places of trans and non-binary belonging, and the other about how to proclaim progressive Christian values in the public square, to share messages of LGBTQ affirming theology and counteract anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ plus policies and rhetoric. During lunch, you will have the choice to join an affinity group to reflect with people of similar identities about your experiences of the day and in the church. The affinity group options are trans non-binary people, loved ones of trans people, cisgender, gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer people, cisgender straight people, people whose churches are considering becoming open and affirming, and youth of all genders and sexualities. Youth are also welcome to participate in any of the other groups. Again, the Justice Summit on trans and non-binary belonging in the church will be on October 7th from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern, and you are invited to fully participate online. The registration deadline is September 16th, which is in just 3 weeks, and information about how to register is posted in the chat. you have any questions, I'd welcome hearing from you by email, which is also in the chat, and I hope to see you there.
Thank you so much, Noah. We're so grateful for Reverend Noah for coming on to the webinar for 3 consecutive times to let us know and share about this important opportunity that you have to continue this commitment into learning and engaging and sharing wisdom and resource so that we can take care of one another and that we can take care of our trans and non-binary siblings in a useful and meaningful way. So we appreciate it. You will get all these links too in your follow-up email from the webinar series. So we'll make sure that we get these links to you as well. I am thrilled to welcome our final guest for this series, Dr. Roberto Ché Espinoza, who is a transgender public scholar and Latinx using story and imaginative narrative with hopes of stewarding ethical futures. Using story and narrative, imaginative narrative, Dr. Roberto writes for the Academy, Church, and Movements for Social Change. His dynamic and inspiring presentations explore the intersections of queer justice and anti-racism, working to dismantle supremacy cultures and displace the toxic culture of whiteness. He is passionate about gender justice as human rights work and bridging differences within our communities, campuses, and churches. Dr. Roberto is the author of Activist Theology and Body Becoming, A Path to Our Liberation. Both books I highly recommend picking up and diving deep into. Dr. Roberto, thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Something I've done the whole series is really center and ground our conversation in the voice of the person that we're communicating with. So I would love to invite you in this first question to share with us what calls you to this work, to your passion, and to what gives you life and movement, and the ways that you engage in this work in the world around you.
It's a great question. I think that I first have to just start with, I felt called at a young age, and the church denied me because I didn't have the right genitalia, but I knew that I was called, and I just put my effort into studying and found that I really love studying theology, philosophy, and ethics. And there were 2 cis white straight guys at my university when I was an undergrad who encouraged me to go to graduate school. Now, I didn't know what that meant, like go to seminary, go to graduate school. I mean, I come from a very poor working class background that just didn't afford me the access to know what was beyond high school or what was beyond college. And it was really these 2 white guys, my mentors, my teachers, who planted seeds for my vocational life as a theologian. And they both said, you need to go study with this Latin American Baptist theologian. I'm Mexican American, and I felt really excited to be studying with someone from Latin America. And, you know, in my mid-20s, after I had finished college and postgraduate work, I packed up my stuff and moved to Chicago and went to seminary. And really, that really began my journey of, I was deeply closeted in college because had they found out that I was questioning my gender or my sexuality in any form or fashion, I would have been expelled. And so I know what it's like to live life under duress. And even as a young person, in my early 20s. And, it wasn't until I moved to Chicago that I felt safe enough to come out and really explore myself. And again, I felt Spirit calling me to name myself in a particular way. And so, since my mid-20s, I have been advocating for Black and brown queer people. I saw in Chicago how white the LGBT or the LG movement was at that time 2 decades ago. And every step I took in my studies correlated with more unfurling of myself. And when I went to do the PhD in Colorado, I firmly embraced a trans identity and figuring out what does a non-binary trans person mean. And even still, it was like the spirit was calling me to continue to unfurl. And so it sounds maybe campy for me to say that, but it really is about call and vocation. I feel called to do this work. I feel it's my vocational path to teach theology wherever I am, and if I have to use words to do it. So I tried to write in my book that it's not about what we believe, it's about our actions. It's about how we treat each other. And that very much is resonant with the theology of belonging and becoming that I hold. So really it's about call and vocation for me, and it takes a village to do this.
Yeah, I love the word unfurl. I love it so much, and I immediately think of the ferns that go in and go out and go in and go out, and the unique nature of how queer people participate in that, whether by force or by necessary need, or by the need to go inward and then go external again. We spent our second episode talking with Aaron Green from REAP, and really kind of diving into the complexities of what happens to queer folks who are at religious institutions that can kick you out, or take away your ability to learn or engage with learning. So it only adds to the stories that we have been talking about, and kind of illuminating for our audience that's been with us. And yeah, it is a call, and a vocation, and not a singular vocation. I think the part of the way that you engage your work is kind of removing the binary of what vocation can look like, and allowing that fluidity of movement, which is so needed in our queer bodies and in all of our bodies. Yeah.
Well, I was taught by my teacher in seminary, Dr. Nancy Bedford, that we're all theologians. Yes, there is that vocation of theologian, but it takes a lifetime to be a theologian. Yes, I'm trained as a theologian and ethicist, but I believe that we're all theologians. Where we buy our coffee, where we buy our gas, where we grocery shop, those are all theological decisions, because all theology is ethics. So I try to encourage people to live their politics, live their values in such a way that it changes the world. And I think if we can collectively begin to suture the wounds, the many ways that the Bible and doctrine and theology has been weaponized against queer people and trans people, if we can begin to suture those wounds, I really think we can bring heaven to earth with the queer and trans people that are still very interested in ritual life, still very interested in spirituality. I mean, here's the thing about queer people and trans people, that queer life, trans life is very much about ritual and very much about the presence of being otherwise, which I think is divine. It's sacred. what we have problems with sometimes is the transcendent, which is why we still need the church to help us experience the transcendent. And so I'm just out here trying to, preach the good news of the gospel, and as a result, I have faced 6 years of targeted harassment and the intensification of violence, threats of violence. And this is a hill I will die on if need be. I'm not trying to be a martyr. Don't feel called to be a martyr. But I think what's happening to queer and trans people globally is criminal, and it's dehumanizing to us all. And I get enough hate mail where I see the dehumanized rhetoric that people are using. And I just want to be about the work to bring heaven to earth and the work to bring together people of all different stripes, all different orientations. How do we build that world? Because that world is possible.
Yeah. I believe in infinite possibility. I think everybody needs unique liberation and widened liberation throughout communities. And I think of liberation as a continuation of moments that are geared towards a practice of getting free. And for folks who have been joining with us, I think a lot of the folks who have been joining with us are from congregational settings. And I'm curious about the ways that we can collectively join together and continuing widening that possibility for interconnectedness and acting justly, not just for, but with queer folks. And I'm curious to hear what you dream or imagine that could look like. Yeah.
Well, when I was working on my first book, Activist Theology, I thought that what I needed to be doing was teaching. And like doing this public scholarship, public theology work through connecting the dots. And it's only been recent that I've always known this, but it's been a recent shift in my thinking organizationally, that what we actually need are relationships. And if we don't know how to create a culture of relationships, and I mean down to the grocery store, like I don't use the self-checkout at the grocery store. And I write about this because for me, buying my groceries is an embodied relational experience. So I want to talk to somebody. So when I was living in Nashville before we had to flee, I would always go to Whole Foods and see Miss Pam. And I had a relationship with Miss Pam. And she'd ask me, what am I cooking? And I would tell her. And I organizationally, we went through this shifting from Activist Theology Project of this like aggressive teaching platform and evolving into our collective becoming, because that is really what we are after. We're after a collective becoming. And, all my research is on becoming, the philosophy of becoming. And when I realized this, that organizationally, we should rename, rebrand, redo everything, that is where the sweet spot is. And in that step of rebranding and renaming ourselves from Activist Theology Project to our collective becoming, I think fits better into the paradigm of a trans and queer person, because trans and queer people are also looking for a collective becoming. And in fact, we all are, even white folks. We're all looking for belonging and becoming in some capacity. And so again, it was about call and vocation. It was like listening to the spirit and paying attention. You know, my teacher says, I talk with my teacher on the daily, and she says, you have to examine the fruit of the tree. If the fruit of the tree is rotten, then what's going on with the roots of the tree? And so how do we plant seeds for a tree that can blossom? Well, it takes all of us, right? It takes all of us to study the soil, to do the digging, to make sure that we're planting it in the right way, right? I mean, and this is a metaphor that many other people have used, but I really believe that if we can figure out how to build the right bridges of relationships with difference, and figure out how to participate in this dance that we call life. We're failing to be human with one another right now. And that is causing such turmoil in the political scene. And I don't know if folks are paying attention to what's happening in Nashville, but like they were allowing military grade weapons inside the Capitol, but activists couldn't bring in a sign or a water bottle, right? So like there are decisions being made that are impacting people tangibly, materially. And so I want to be about building relationships. And like my work has always been about that, but now I'm like figuring out, okay, like what does that really look like? Not just talking about it, but actually doing that work, which is really what brought us together when I was, you know, in the beginning stages of trying to figure out how am I going to get out of this place where I'm not leaving my home, where I am the target of harassment, where I'm receiving threats of violence. What do I do? And through connections, we got connected. And again, it's about relationships.
Yeah, I feel, I love that you shared the story about the grocery store. I have always gone to the bank in person, like to withdraw or put money in. And like, I've always known the bank teller's name. I know every barista's name of the coffee shop that I patron. I love the cosmic amazingness of organic conversation and dialogue. And I really do believe that, if we're made from, you know, the stardust to stardust, dust to dust, which is on my kneecap, I do not suggest getting a tattoo on your knee. It is very painful, but I wanted to be able to see it every day. I really believe in that. And I believe that that we have the imago Dei within each of us. And that means that we are going to desire to be in relationship with each other. And that equally creates this intense tension in this moment too, where I'm constantly also, this is a reflection of a previous conversation today, but I was at the Georgia State Capitol yesterday for the Education Committee hearing for a bill that will be heard. We hope the bill does, but a bill that will go before and be voted on, which emulates the previous, like, don't say gay bills and things that have taken place in Florida and other states. And it was public comment. This was the first meeting for public comment, and it was packed. And every single person in that room was speaking in deep opposition. And there was 2 comments of people getting up and speaking in favor of. And I really went home after a care space afterwards, which, by the way, if you have a church close to the state capitol or near, do you know what you can do in 2024? You can have a care space, my good friends. You can have a space for policy, lobbyists, workers, queer people who are there, parents, clergy. Like, we can take care of each other in this election cycle. We can use our physical spaces to give reprieve and rest. But I went home and I thought about, can I still see the humanity in the faces and in the actions of individuals who are writing these pieces of legislation, who are saying these things. Can I still also be concerned with our collective becoming and belonging when these things are being said and done, which is such a challenge that I'll be open about. But relationships truly are the hinge text to caretaking, organizing, space making, way making, possibility. And without it, I don't know who we are. We forget who we are. And I know that we feel in our bodies somewhere at some point in the day that we belong to each other. But for some reason, we have gotten very far away from how we belong to each other and the ways that we relate to each other. Dr. Roberto, you've mentioned having to flee and the difficulties of that. And you've been directly impacted by the ridiculous, insidious, hateful rhetoric. And I'm wondering what you have experienced in terms of collective becoming and togetherness that offered you care, nourishment, resource during that time. And offering that in a way of saying, here are ways, this is a tangible way this has taken place. And also elevating and validating your narrative so that folks have an awareness too, of what's happening.
Yeah, so my wife and I had to flee Nashville, and we came to a sanctuary state and are living in a safe house right now. We did not have the money to break our apartment lease, which was $6,000. We did not have the money to just up and leave. And I went to social media and I wrote my Substack, and I asked people to send $20, like give up their Starbucks trip and send $20 so that I could get the hell out of Nashville. And it came at a time where I wasn't leaving the house. There was so much hate mail that I was getting, so much targeted harassment, that it was no way to live. I felt like a prison in my own home. I couldn't even go to the grocery store. I had a panic attack in the grocery store, too many people. And in about 3 days, we had the money to break the lease and begin to make a plan. And it took a little while to get out of Nashville because these things take time. But I also want to say that I left my house to go to the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries convocation in Atlanta. And during that time, my wife had emergency surgery. So it's like, I'm very excited to leave the house and take a trip, right? Because I'm like imprisoned in my own home. And we get to Atlanta, and my wife is having abdominal pain, and it's intensifying. And so we spent 8 hours in the emergency room. She has emergency surgery. She had her appendix removed. And it was like one thing after another, right? The need to leave, and then this emergency surgery. And so, like I had to pay some of that money that we were going to use for to flee at the hospital, right? And I texted a friend and I said, cast a spell, do some magic tricks. I just had to use $1,000 so that Aaron could get, care, because this is how our system works, that you have to pay your deductible in order to be seen at a hospital. So I mention this because these systems are compromised. These systems that we have privatized under the guise of insurance are complicit in the same kind of harm that the state is doing. And so now here I am, I need that money to pay to get out of our lease, right? To rent a storage unit, to put all of our stuff in, I don't have money to spend is what I'm saying. And I put it up on Facebook that, I'm a theologian who lives paycheck to paycheck, and that theologians, I don't know if you know this, but we don't make a lot of money. And Dr. Barber saw that and asked me to call him. So I called him, and he paid for our hotel stay for the time that we had to remain in Atlanta after Aaron's surgery. I mentioned this not to name drop people who helped me, but to say we need people who will step up and make material change, create conditions for material change. We would not have made it. People brought us food and water. We were staying in a hotel, that like where we don't have access to things. So after that incident, people continued to give money for the surgery stuff, for the hospitalization, because she had to stay 2 nights in the hospital. And I say all that to say we need to show up for each other, and like in real ways. And June and July, the whole world showed up for me. Somebody sent me $200 yesterday to go buy groceries. And I am in a place where it's not very accessible. There's not an airport here. So it's not like I can like do my gigs and, fly wherever. I mean, we came here because we needed to be safe. And that means that I'm going to have to get real creative on how to make money. And that's the thing. We have sunk all of our money and our time and our effort into urban cities when trans and queer people are not able to live there because it's so fucking expensive. So how do we be class conscious about the material changes that we need to make? How do we create conditions for trans and queer people to thrive and flourish when they can't afford New York City, Chicago, or Atlanta, or Nashville for that reason? We were paying $3,000 in rent. And why were we paying that much? Because we had to move after the Proud Boys came after me a week before my gender affirming surgery. So there is this need for churches and faith communities to take seriously the economic disparity that many of us are facing right now.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. I don't know if people understand or are aware of the efforts that these various hate groups and organizations will go towards to try and silence the voices of those who are lifting up others, and just to silence people in general from existence.
Right.
And of course, that is becoming more elevated to a degree. But there's complexity in that elevation. Oftentimes what gets elevated are more of are white folks who are facing that disparity, as opposed to Black and brown trans folks who have layers and levels to systemic oppression that are taking place. And it's just every day while we're in this webinar right now, this is taking place and happening to people we may never know their names. and that material aspect is a critical way to play a relational role. And so is the spatial component too. I think this whole time that we've been in this webinar series, I've been uplifting for churches. You have a physical space, and there are ways for you to hold folks in that physical space. And there are also ways for you to hold space in the financial format too, for folks who are looking for relocation to sanctuary states. And if your congregation is within a sanctuary state, and you're interested in ways that you can support trans folks who are looking for that ability to move, reach out to us. Let us dream together and discern and figure out how we can make that possible. Because it's true, we do need each other. More than the urgency is very palpable, but the urgency has always been there. And it's a moment of it's a rupture moment. And it's a tilling soil moment where what we do now can plant seeds that change the ways that we engage in relationality with each other in the future. And I have so much hope for the ways that folks show up for people, like the ways that people have shown up for you, Dr. Roberto, in that moment, and the ways that I have seen other communities show up for other queer friends and colleagues in that moment. Those are the kinds of stories too, and the kind of narratives that I hope that that we can continue uplifting too, because in these systems that create binaries and create boxed in and kind of disembody imagination, sometimes we can't even see through the fog of what could be possible in action. And so with that kind of in mind about uplifting joy, I know as a queer non-binary person, I have to find my joy too. I ask my friends and my colleagues in circles, what's bringing you joy? What was useful today? What can we celebrate together? Because we get inundated with all these intersectional issues and harms, and they're valid and they deserve to be known and aware of and action. But I'd love to spend a moment hearing about how you may be able to now engage, because I know being in that threatening position for that amount of time was hard and difficult, but ways that you're finding trans joy and maybe even practices or communities that are bringing that for you and holding you well.
Well, I've only been here in Sanctuary not even 2 weeks. I have a great sigh of relief in being where we are. I'm able to go get coffee by myself. I'm able to I go to the gym and I interact with other people. I mean, it seems so basic, but for months I was holed up in my apartment, not able to leave. So what's given me joy is the fact that I ate breakfast this morning and then went to the gym. And my nervous system, I'm working through these polyvagal cards to help nurture my nervous system. And part of the work is remembering what anchors you. And I now, Rachel, have the capacity to think. When we were in Nashville and I was not leaving the house, I mean, I was having panic attacks inside my house because of what was coming through voicemail, text, and email and DMs. You know, I didn't sign up to be a public figure. I went to school to become a theologian and to teach, but Spirit had different ideas. And so this is part of it. I understand. But it takes a toll on you. 6 years of targeted harassment and the intensification of threats of violence, it has taken a toll on me. And now I have the spaciousness to think and to string a sentence together in my head to remember what anchors me. That gives me joy. Being able to walk outside our safe house and take in the beauty of our area. When I was confined to 1,000 square feet in Nashville, I have a lot of joy right now. And like you, I have hope, because there's so many people right now. I mean, I could tell you story after story about people who reached out to me who were in need of mutual aid after the Covenant school shooting in Nashville. Trans and queer people not leaving their homes. One queer person who was Jewish didn't have money for their Passover meal. And our organization sent out a bunch of money for people to have access to the need. We just responded to the need. And we need more people who are willing to just give mutual. We need a bottom-up economy right now. And that I have hope in that, and that gives me joy that those networks exist.
Yeah. I'm so grateful that you are in a safe space, and grateful that you can re-engage holistically, and think and feel and move. I think it's so easy and possible for us to take that for granted.
Yes.
And I think it's equally important to hear the joy, and also to hear the ways that the moment and the continued, decades of this rhetoric being built, the impact that has, and has had, on queer folks, especially trans and non-binary folks. We need those oral histories to be told and to be heard and to be seen. And we also need spaces for restorative practices and reintegration and spiritual care. And my greatest hope is that that we can be the people of God who are, as the Hebrew text says, is always becoming, in the active and moving state. We have folks who have been on this webinar series with us the whole time. And you said something, particularly around mutual aid, but you said something about, your org was showing up to meet the need. And you know what, friend, I feel like that sounds so simplistic, right? But that's what I think we as the people of God can do and need to do, is show up to the need. And so as I'm kind of looking to the wider future step for the ways that our ministry team continues to offer resource and dialogue and partnership, I'm curious what your empowerment and encouragement would be to those with us right now and who will watch later, who are in congregational settings, who are in different community faith orgs, who may feel overwhelmed with the complexity of the issue and what they can do. What your words of wisdom would be to them in acting and taking care of alongside us.
There are 13 sanctuary states right now.
Mhm.
In Missouri and West Virginia, if you are caught and arrested for using a bathroom that does not match your license, or if you're a trans person, you are at risk of being mandated by the state to detransition. So
Mhm.
we are talking about the eradication of trans and queer people. And what I want to say is there are 13 sanctuary states right now. We need churches to become sanctuary sites for trans and queer people. Talk to your churches, talk to your pastors, talk to your elder board, your deacons, talk to your people, and begin making a plan to become a sanctuary for trans and queer people, because there was a mass exodus out of Tennessee.
Mhm.
And there still is, and countless other places.
Mhm.
Become a sanctuary for trans and queer people, and then everybody has these discretion funds. Create a discretion fund for the material need for trans and queer people. Unfortunately, we still have to use money, and more people worship the all-American dollar than not. So create a discretionary fund so that you can give mutual aid to people who need it.
Mhm.
We were in need of food after surgery because I couldn't leave the house because of targeted harassment, and Aaron was recovering. So we started a meal train, right? So get together your people, do meal trains for people who are in need. I mean, I never thought that I would be in this position. I've gone to school, I'm educated, I have access, but when it comes down to it, I don't have the material conditions to provide a safe haven for myself. I had to rely on strangers to create those conditions. I mean, that's where we are right now. So
Yeah.
I would say become a sanctuary church, create a discretionary fund.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're pondering what that looks like, how that works, you don't have to ponder alone. That's why Gender and Sexuality Justice Ministries is here, so that we can ponder and work with, and dream and expand. But it really is a matter of being in relationship with and meeting the need.
Yeah.
It's food, it's clothing, it's medicine. It's, do you need help with post-surgery recovery? Do you need help for gender affirming surgery? Like, there are all these ways that we can love trans and non-binary folks well. And it really does involve this is the Baptist part of me. I'm very UCC, friends, but the Baptist part of me, who grew up Baptist for my childhood, is thinking about the hands and feet metaphor of being the hands and feet of Christ. And right now, that's really what's needed. Yeah. We need the collective to be the hands and feet of Christ. Yeah. And I believe in our United Church of Christ denomination to be siblings in Christ, and I know that we are eager to do it. I'm just seeing
this comment here about, are you expanding our definition of refugee? Yeah, there are multiple modes of refugee in political theory. I am a trans refugee who sought sanctuary in a sanctuary state. I left everything, packed up my car, and drove and got the hell out of Nashville. Yes. And there are more trans and queer refugees who are leaving fraught states with anti-trans legislation, and we need to begin to serve them. We may not agree on everything, but it's a human right to have a house. It's a human right to have access to food.
Mhm.
It's just a human right. It's a human right to have access to internet.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's we could have like so many other intersectional threads about the reality of um, exodus and refugee within the United States context, right? Um, I mean, within the definition of the baseline of what it takes to be a refugee, if you're having to flee in order to find safety, yeah, that's where we are. And many activists or organizers or trans folks themselves, as you're hearing from Dr. Roberto, would say, I am a refugee. This is a refugee crisis within the United States.
I mean, when the head of the United Church of Canada reaches out to me and asked, do you want us to sponsor you? Like, that's how real it got, because that's how dire my situation was.
Yeah. 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 There, and Craig, yes, I see you, and we will. The hope is that we can continue to find ways to create infrastructure and support local churches for these efforts. But we're at 4:21. Great. I always have to like start looking at time. We're at 4:21. I want to say some few closing things, and then we give Dr. Roberto a closing moment. Please know that it means the world to this queer person and to our team and to our collective that you have spent time every Thursday with us listening. It's so important. It is a part of doing relationship that you have sat and listened and asked questions. And I hope that this will be the beginning of the dialogue that we hold with all of you, encouraging and sharing resource and offering the need to be able to do this work together. Please, please, please know that you can reach out anytime to myself or anyone else on the gender and sexuality justice team, and that we are here to walk with you, alongside you, and to build a heaven on earth that we know is possible, and that we are called to, that we desire. So stay in the connection, sign up for the Trans Justice Summit that the Southern New England Conference is hosting, and continue to look out for offerings that we will unveil and build together, because we build this together. But Dr. Roberto, are there any closing remarks, things you wish to say to cap off, close this time together before we sign off?
I mean, I just am grateful that you provided space to share the story and to talk about the real material needs of queer and trans people. I just was kind of looking at the chat, and this is another great migration, and this is part of the slow civil war. This is what civil war looks like right now. It's not going to be armed. It may get to that point, but it's about rolling back these protections, these human right protections at the state level, and forcing people for forced migration. This is often what happens in Latin America. It's what happened to my family in Mexico. Poverty forced them to migrate. And we know that empires come and go. And I think we're at some very real places of the end of empire for this United States. And it's time that we show up for the people in need. That's poor people, that's disabled people, that's Black and brown people, that's refugees in all different modes. It's time to, as I say in my book, get out of the pews and get in the streets, get your hands dirty.
Yeah. Yeah. Time to love out loud. Yeah. Hands and feet, full on. Dr. Roberto, thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing the needs that are before us. If you have questions at all about where you are in your church site, I'm seeing the chat too. Yeah, please email me. We'll talk. We'll work together, and we'll listen to the context and we'll find what the need is, and we can do that work together. Dr. Roberto's links are in the chat, but know that you're going to get the follow-up email, and then you'll also have a recap email of the whole series, so you'll get all the links and all the things. But we're just so grateful that you spent time with us today, Dr. Roberto, and we're so grateful to each of you for being with us. And please share this series. You obviously can share from YouTube to continue spreading this wisdom from all of our guests. But we are grateful for your time and your wisdom, and grateful for your deep listening this month.
Thank you.
Go in peace and go in blessing, and be well.
Siblings in Christ, if you are moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.